All right, so hello BlackAlps. I'm so happy to be here with you today. And my today's talk is Broken Isolation, Draining Your Credentials from Popular macOS Password Managers. So, as I was introduced, I'm Wojciech Regula. I'm head of mobile security at Securing. I have over 60 vulnerabilities already registered in Apple, so I spent too much time on it. I'm mostly focused on iOS and macOS application security. I'm also an author of the first on the market iOS application security course. In my free time, I run a blog, which is wojciechregula.blog. I know the domain name is hard, so if you can use an alias osx.zip, there will be a redirect to my domain. And I'm also an author of an open source anti-jailbreak Swift library that's available on GitHub, iOS Security Suite. So if you're interested, feel free to visit. Okay, so the plan for my today's talk is that I'm gonna start from introduction. And in the introduction part, please be prepared that I will need to explain you some basics about macOS security, macOS isolation mechanisms. That will be about 30 slides about theory, so do not be bored here. I believe that you need to know those basics to understand the exploitation part, so I'll try to, go through it in a way that would be acceptable for you. So macOS security and isolation mechanisms, and then there will be the exploitation part that you're probably waiting for. Here I will open a discussion because some of the issues I'm gonna present are 0 days, some are end days, some are architectonical decisions. So you will answer with your hands if you think it's a vulnerability or a feature. And at the end, because I don't like leaving, especially developers, without recommendations on how those things can be done securely. So at the end, I will cover some recommendations and, of course, the conclusion. So my previous talks were usually about vulnerabilities, exploitation. My last 3 Black Hat talks were like 20 ways to bypass your macOS privacy mechanisms. Then a year later on Black Hat, I had 20 plus new ways to bypass your macOS privacy mechanisms. And 1 year later, I had a talk, Unlimited Ways to Bypass Your macOS Privacy Mechanisms. So this talk is not about vulnerabilities or about, going one by one, exploit. This is a talk that I call it a talk with a mission to show people that macOS is not Linux, and I will show some differences. So let's start from the history, my favorite slide, taken from Wikipedia. And you can see that Linux is in here, but macOS is in here. So macOS had 2 parents, FreeBSD and NextStep. So if you think about macOS, you should think more about FreeBSD, not Linux. This is, those both systems are Unixes and are POSIX compliant. However, the POSIX compliancy is not fully implemented like it is on Linux, let's say. I will give you an example later. But there is more interesting thing, which is the NextStep parent, which has totally different concept. It's not a Unix, it's not a POSIX system. So the current version of macOS has a kernel which is a hybrid kernel, which has some parts taken from FreeBSD, but also has the microkernel taken from NextStep, which is called Mach. And Mach is responsible for things like processor scheduling, multitasking, virtual memory management, interprocess communication, and Mach traps. While BSD, of course, will be responsible for process management, signal handling, user and group management, syscalls, TCP IP stack, and sockets. So one of the most important things, Mach and BSD maintain different security models because Mach's security model is based on port rights, whereas the BSD security model operates on process ownership. So different security model. And if you know some, Apple technologies, you will see macOS, watchOS, the new visionOS, iOS, tvOS, iPadOS, and many more. And you must understand that under the hood, they all run not the very same system, but the kernel mostly is the same. There will be different user space applications. There will be different daemons. There will be some different kernel extensions, but the kernel itself, the very core of the kernel, will be the same. So that's usually when you see on Apple Security Advisory, you see that, oh, there's the same CVE that has been published for all the Apple systems. That's because of mostly the same kernel. And a few years ago, maybe not a few, that was like 10 years ago, Apple released this diagram with the concept of the all systems security. So if you take a look at the left side, at the software level, we'll be usually having two partitions. The first one is OS partition, which is not encrypted. And this is really important to understand. The OS partition is read-only. In fact, when your system boots up, you only have access to the snapshot of the unencrypted file OS partition part. It is sealed. So it is like a cryptographic hash put on this partition, but it's not encrypted because there is no sensitive data. Everybody gets the same copy of the OS partition, right? The interesting part is the user partition, which is encrypted. And in theory, all applications should be in application sandbox. This is what you can observe on iPhones, right? All the applications you download from the App Store are sandboxed. This is the same thing on visionOS, on watchOS, etc. On macOS, app sandboxing is not mandatory. However, we are all living in hallucination, as Elon Musk said one day. And when system integrity protection is turned on, which is the default configuration on macOS, there will be something called a global profile enforced on all the applications. So even though you think you are not sandboxed, in fact, there is a global profile enforced on macOS on every application, which effectively makes your application sandboxed, even if your operating system tells no, even if your activity manager tells you, no, this application is not sandboxed. In the end, everything is sandboxed. It's all global hallucinations profile sandbox, as I like to speak about. And at the hardware level, I will not bore you with that, but the only thing I wanted to touch is the secure enclave, which is a hardware key-based manager that's isolated from the processor to provide extra layer of security. So even if the kernel gets somehow compromised, you should not be able in theory get some cryptographic keys, pass keys that are currently trendy, let's say. So we have another chip which is responsible for crypto-related operations. Great. So now let's talk about the differences between macOS and Linux. So applications running with the same user ID should not be able to control themselves. And this is very important assumption. This is something different than on Linux, right? If on Linux you have two processes running with the same user ID, in theory you should be able to control each other. And if your application wants to be controlled by other applications, for example debuggers, it must be signed with a special entitlement, which is com Apple get task allow. So your application must deliberately say, I want to be debugged. This is the idea. And some of you may say, okay, but you told us that macOS is POSIX compliant, so there should be ptrace. And yes, ptrace is present on macOS, but it's not fully implemented. So you cannot inject your code using ptrace. Great. So now let's talk about the isolation mechanism that work under the hood. But before I'll start explaining the basic isolation things, I'm gonna tell you what would happen if there will not be any kind of isolation. So without isolation, you can, for example, impersonate private entitlements, which would lead to bypassing TCC, which is the whole privacy thing idea. If you use any of Apple products, you probably are used to the prompt, right? An application wants to get access to your camera. Application wants to get access to your desktop, to your address book, to your location, photos, etc., etc. TCC now is a really large mechanism. And the idea behind it is that even if you have root on your machine, you should not be able to bypass this prompt. Apple wants to make sure that the user deliberately clicks, OK, I give this application permission to access the camera. This is the idea. So without this, you would be able, for example, without the isolation, you would be, for example, able to inject your code to an application that already has the permissions granted and take over its permissions. So the whole idea of TCC wouldn't make any sense. Because if there will be no isolation, you would be able also to elevate your privileges from user to root. Because there are some entitlements that allow actually asking the system, okay, operating system, give me root permissions, and operating system will happily do so. So you would be able, again, to inject to such an application, you would be able to achieve user to root local privilege escalation. Without the entitlement, without the isolation, you would be also able to bypass the whole SIP, the whole idea of the global hallucination sandbox. So you would be able to do not almost, everything on your operating system. I said almost because the security enclave still remains a separate chip. But in the area of macOS kernel, you would be able to do everything. Without isolation, you would be also able to trick any third-party applications to, again, get user to root local privilege escalation, get their C permissions, etc., etc. So now you understand that no isolation in macOS means no security. And thankfully, Apple documented almost everything in Apple Platform Security White Paper, but unfortunately, it is almost all documented, but without the technical details. So still, we need to reverse engineer a lot of things. And I wish I have seen such a talk when I started macOS, because everything what's gonna happen on the slides was something that was not public. It all, came out of the reverse engineering, all of the, Apple isolation mechanisms done by me and other, of course, researchers. I didn't, discover everything. There's a lot of community effort on documenting these things. So let's talk about the global hallucination sandbox, which is called System Integrity Protection. It's based on a sandbox kernel extension, and it will restrict access to many directories on macOS. It will even deny debugger attachments to process signed directly by Apple. And System integrity protection is also known as rootless, because on macOS you are not a god if you have root. Still, we are living in the sandbox, the global hallucination sandbox, so unfortunately you would not be able to do everything with your system you want. And when turned off, there is no privacy controls on macOS, and malicious application can elevate its privileges to user and root, because without SIP there is no isolation. So all the things that I explained on a slide before will not happen. So if you manage macOSs in your companies, please make sure that SIP is enforced to be on every machine. And this is really, really important, trust me. I saw it too many times on Stack Overflows. Questions like, oh, dear community, something on my macOS does not work, something gets blocked, my firewall blocks something, etc., etc. And I saw it too many times. The most voted answer was, yeah, they'll turn off SIP and you will be fine. And in fact, it worked. So, because there will be no isolation, so probably all the problems will disappear. But this is absolutely not how you should fix your problems on macOS. Please leave SIP alone. Great. So if you'd like to see what's the status of SIP, just use CSR util status, and there will be information if it's enabled or disabled. Okay, so let's do an experiment. Let's use LLDB, which is Apple Signed Debugger, the official one, and let's try to inject to logdaemon. So we have root, as you can see on the terminal. We give log this process ID, but you'll see that the process attachment has failed. So let's open console log. And you would see that, okay, debug server tried to call task for pit, which is a Mach trap, which is like a syscall, but in the Mach microkernel part of the macOS. And in the end, macOS told attach failed. I'm not going to allow it. So debugging a process which gives us a path to code execution within the buggy's context requires getting the task port of the debuggy. So we are not in the FreeBSD part of the kernel. We are now in the Mach part of the kernel, where the security assumptions are kind of different. So it involves using the task port pit function, which actually is not a regular function. It is a Mach trap, the syscall in this part of the world. And as we have just seen, calling task for pit is highly restricted, and it would be possible only under really strict circumstances. And all of these Mach trap requests are controlled by taskgate daemon and AMFI, which stands for Apple Mobile File Integrity Daemon. But what if SIP is enabled, which is the default configuration? And this is really fruitful slide, and if you are interested in macOS security, I wish I had seen it like a few years ago when I started, because this is something which is not documented, and this is the knowledge you need to have in order to inject code to other Apple or non-Apple applications. So the task port retrieval is not possible when the target app is a platform binary or has hardened runtime. On hardened runtime, I will elaborate later, but you must know that platform binary usual debugging is not possible. If the debuggee holds a public Apple get task allow entitlement, the injection is possible even by the same user, so no root is required. So this is the situation where your application said, I want to be debugged. So if you are developing an application using Xcode, for example, Xcode will automatically, in the debug mode, sign the application with the entitlement, with the get task allow entitlement. Okay, but what if there is no get task allow entitlement and there is no hardened runtime applied to the application? And it's, of course, not Apple platform binary. The injection will be possible, but with root permissions. Well, that's good for us researchers, because there will be some applications that will allow code injection. And the injection is always possible when the debugger app holds a private Apple system task port entitlement. But for your information, there is no public application ever released that had this entitlement and allowed us using that application to debug. Maybe internally in Cupertino, Apple has an application like that signed with their certificate, but there is no debugger known to public with that entitlement. This is good, because if there was such a debugger on the internet, like malicious attackers could abuse it to, perform the code injections and bypass the whole isolation idea. Okay, but can we just, spoof an entitlement, sign our application with the fruitful entitlement we want? So here I prepared a simple Hello World application. There is a XML file with an entitlement which allows us to control the TCC, the privacy framework. And we sign it. And at the end, you can see that, unfortunately, macOS will kill our app instantly. And yeah, MFI, which I introduced already, told that restricted entitlements not validated, bailing out, so our application get killed. But there's a fun fact. In 2020, in Big Sur Beta, I found plenty of executables provided by Apple that had get task allow, and they had some private entitlements. So I was able to inject to those applications and abuse their entitlements to bypass, some privacy restrictions. But probably they just forgot to, change the debug mode to release in the binary releasing process. All right. But this talk should be about password managers, didn't it? So let's try to build a knowledge base. So what we need to inject to password managers or any third-party applications, because you can use this research to inject to any third-party applications. So we'll be looking for applications with get task allow or without hardened runtime. That would usually require root, right, as I introduced. So what is the hardened runtime? And according to Apple, the hardened runtime, along with the system integrity protection, protects the runtime integrity of your software by preventing certain classes of exploits like code injection, dynamically linked library hijacking, and process memory space tampering. So to summarize it, it blocks code injections. And nowadays, all the software downloaded from the internet must be notarized. And notarization is the mechanism that generally prevented your Macs from getting infected. So if you're a developer, you want to release your application to the public, you must sign it with your paid developer certificate. You must send your application to Apple. They will perform an anti-malware scan on this application. They will stamp on it cryptographically, and they will send you back the application, and then you know that you can release your application to the public and macOS will not block it. In the meanwhile, notarization also verifies if you switch the mode and Xcode from debug to release. And it verifies if the hardened runtime is turned on. So in theory, we all should be fine, right? Because in theory, all the password managers should have the hardened runtime turned on because they are downloaded from the internet, so they must be notarized, in theory. But let's see how the hardened runtime is notarized. Hardened runtime is enforced. So it's enforced by setting a code signing attribute, which you can find in csblob.h, and there's a flag called csruntime. So with a code sign tool, we can just provide our path to our application, and you will see if this flag is set, which means, okay, so there is hardened runtime applied to our application. But there are runtime exceptions that developers may apply on their applications. And there are at least two interesting runtime exceptions. The first one is allow DILT environment variables entitlement, and the second one is disable library validation entitlement. So let's start from the later. On macOS, if you have an application signed with your developer ID, and this application wants to load a dynamic library, macOS will verify if the dynamic library is signed directly by Apple or has been signed with the same developer ID certificate. So if you want to perform known from Linux DLL hijacking, which is signed with a different dev ID, in theory macOS should block it. But for example, if you want to support plugins in your applications, you may disable the enforcement on the same team ID. So there is one interesting entitlement. And there's the second one, which allows DILT to recognize the environment variables we provide. And there is one interesting environment variables called DILT insert libraries, which is like LD preload node known from Linux. We specify a path to the dynamic library and it will be loaded. Great. So let's, for example, take a look at Firefox to check if there are any runtime exceptions we can use. And you may ask, okay, Firefox has disabled library validation set to true. I reported it in 2019, I think. And Firefox responded to me, yes, because we support Flash, which is a plugin signed with a different team ID, so we need to have the disabled library validation set to true. But I told them, okay, but if you allow external libraries signed with different team IDs, and users, for example, use Google Maps, so allow location for Firefox. They, open Zoom calls. So there is camera access granted, screen sharing access granted, microphone access granted. So in theory, malware can just inject to Firefox and get those. But I said, we're sorry, Flash compatibility is more important. Okay, so this is the full list of the things we can have to inject our code to third-party applications. So we'll be looking for get task allow, apps without hardened runtime, apps with hardened runtime but containing useful runtime exceptions, or applications that supports some custom debugging features that don't allow on get task allow or the task for pit on the Mac part. Great. So, and yeah, if you are, for example, interested in Apple security, bug bounty, take a screen of it, because take a picture, because that's important. All right, so let's start with password managers. And here I want you to maybe not vote, but at the first moment, who uses MacPass? There will be a question here for you. One person, okay. It's really good password manager, written in Objective-C. It's downloaded from the internet, which, in theory, no authorization should be enforced, and it is, which is, nice. And it has current runtime turned on, but unfortunately, disable library validation set to true. So maybe we can change one of MacPass dynamic libraries or frameworks. But no, unfortunately, 1 year ago, I think, Apple introduced a new mechanism called app protection. So if you launch your application for the first time, the directory gets blocked, and only Apple or other applications signed with the same team ID will be able to modify the application's directory. So you should not be, this all DLL hijacking trick will not work, unfortunately, only with this one runtime exception. And the mechanism, as I said, you need to have an application signed with the same team ID because, for example, your applications may want to have an updater. So there must be a way to modify the directory of the application because, for example, for the update purposes. But why generally MacPass disables this or has this runtime exception? Because it supports loading custom plugins. That's usually the main explanation of it. And plugins are stored in library application support MacPass, so they are not protected on purpose because this is the directory where you should place your plugin, so it's not protected by it is a feature that is not the directory is not protected. And we can of course abuse it to drain all the MacPass passwords, credentials. Let me show you the demo. So we have the identifier of MacPass. Then let's read its defaults, just like apps preferences. Okay, the database is located in here. Now let's turn the plugin loading feature to be on. So we copy the plugin to the correct directory. And now we can just simply open MacPass. Unlock it, and the master password with all the credentials will be dumped to the TMP. Okay, so question to you. Who thinks this is a feature? Okay. Who thinks this was a vulnerability? Okay. 50-50, I would say. We don't have time to explain the exploits, but the talk will be online, so you can follow them. All of the exploits are on my GitHub because I always publish everything that I find to the open source. So, yeah, generally it was a simple method replacement called a method swazzling on Apple technologies. Great. Bitwarden. Who uses Bitwarden? Oh. Like 30% of the audience, that's good. It's an open source password manager with premium plan. It's written in Electron and it's distributed via Mac App Store. So the first password manager was downloaded from the internet by distributed via their website. The second one is distributed via Mac App Store, right? So let's start from code sign, verifying the hardened runtime flag. None. But didn't I just say that all the applications downloaded from the internet must be notarized, and notarization enforces hardened runtime. Yes, I told that, but I didn't lie to you. Distributed via internet, not via App Store. So doesn't the App Store enforce notarization on the applications? No. And how we can now abuse Bitwarden? Just by, there's no hardened runtime, so we can use build insert libraries, inject a library, and that's it. So really simple exploitation. But what about the notarization? What about the hardened runtime? You can read in the documentation, add the hardened runtime capability, which is not necessary for App Store apps, but is best practice for new code. Okay, so if you are a developer and you want to distribute your application on your website, you must comply with the notarization, hardened runtime, etc. But if you distribute your applications via secure Mac App Store, there's no notarization enforced. It's only a good practice. Okay, so I just show you that I'm just showing you the demo. It's really simple. I'm just injecting code to a dynamic library, a simple keylogger to Bitwarden, so you can see that I was able to get the password. So the password is recorded. Really simple exploit. Who thinks this is a vulnerability? Who thinks this is a feature? Okay, one hand for the feature. Keylogger is pretty simple. It's on my GitHub. We don't have time to cover it. So let's go to another password manager, NordPass. Who uses NordPass? Nobody? That's good. It's downloaded directly from the internet, a popular password manager written in Electron. This is important, in Electron, so we're changing technology. And critical Electron fuses are turned on, what allows code injection. That's bad. And my last DevCon talk was about electronizing macOS privacy, so I wrote an open source tool that auto-exploits Electron applications, so if you want to reproduce it, just download the tool and it will guide you. But how can we see if the Electron fuses, like a custom debugging features for Electrons, aren't turned on? Just by npx electron/fuses, you read the application and you will be having information that enable node CLI inspect arguments is turned on. But come on, Electron applications are like web browsers with embedded JavaScript, HTML, CSS code, right? And all the web browsers should be able to open DevTools, right? If you go to any website on, for example, Google Chrome, you press Command I, there will be DevTools, you can write any JavaScript code, right? That will be executed on the website. And Electron is like a browser with HTML, CSS, JavaScript code, right? So this is should be a feature, right? That I can execute code within Electron. Let's see the demo. It's also pretty simple. I just set some Electron envars to ease the exploitation. That will just make the exploitation easier. That's just like a proof of concept. So I can, of course, avoid Electronize. There is the tool that I coded. It's open source. It opens the WebSocket debugging URL, which is like a DevTools. Now, we unlocked NordPass with our master key. And in a moment, you will see that all the passwords have been dumped. Okay, who thinks this is a vulnerability? Who thinks that this is a feature? Okay, not so many hands, but I think it's still 50-50, like 70% of the audience doesn't have any, vote for the problem, but as you can see, it's not really easy. The JavaScript code behind it's not really, complicated. It's just 15 lines of code maybe, or something like that. Okay, KeePassXC. Who uses KeePassXC? A lot of people. That's good. It's downloaded directly from the internet, completely open source, native, written in Qt, so different technology. And it's very well written and very good documented. Actually, I have nothing against KeePassXC. Their developers are really good. Kudos for them. But I wanted to show KeePassXC because it's really well written, and in the same time it has a browser plugin, which for convenience of the users is like a thing that most of the password managers nowadays have. And if you read the documentation, which is really good, you will see that there is some asymmetric crypto between the plugin and the main application. I'm not going to bore you with that, but the problem with it is that macOS browsers are not really known for best isolation practices, as you can see regarding Firefox I told you about, but Chrome and other browsers have similar problems. So even though the KeePassXC may be secure when written, if it allows a browser plugin which communicates with the main app, the security threat and the threat model hurts. So let me show you the demo. We have the plugin, so we'll be trying to spoof the connection with the main app. This is the full code. We're gonna need name of the connection and the public key, which should be, to be honest, private key. Never mind. So using this bash one-liner, we get the connection ID because it must be saved in the browser's directory, right? Somewhere. Browser must save this public key and the connection name if it is able to establish the connection. So we just copy and paste it, launch the script, and that's it. We have all the credentials from KeePassXC if the browser plugin is allowed. We've been able to spoof the connection with the KeePassXC. So, is this a vulnerability? Who thinks this is a vulnerability? Okay, who thinks this is a feature? Well, I would say more for vulnerability this time. Exploit code, pretty simple. And the last one, a Proton Pass from the Proton VPN. Who uses Proton Pass? Okay. It's a plugin-only password manager. There is no standalone macOS app. So all the encryption, decryption happens in the browser's runtime. Was it a good architectonical decision? I'm leaving this answer to you. Do you know Selenium? Anybody worked in QA or something like that? So browsers have features that they can be, they can be automated, let's say, right? We can write a Python code which will automate the browser to do actions. QA use it. You use that tool. So can't we just instruct our browser to open the plugin, let the Proton Pass decrypt whatever it wants, I don't care what it does, and then ask the browser to get the entries. I don't care even about the decryption, master password, or anything like that, because all the encryption, decryption thing will happen automatically, so I don't even have to know it is encrypted. So let's use my Selenium script. No root, no any additional entitlements. I just run it. Browser will pop up. I can, of course, hide the browser. This is just for you to see that actually the exploitation happened. And I was able to get all the entries from the browser because I just instructed it to copy it, and from the pasteboard I copied it back to my Python script. Really easy solution. This is mostly the full code of the exploit. And of course there will be like 10 lines of code to inject to Firefox, etc. But this is just a regular easy code. Great. So who thinks this is a vulnerability in Proton Pass? Who thinks this is a feature? Okay. I'm opening up the discussion. After the talk, you can discuss with each other if you think. All right, so this is it. So let me sum everything up. I started from the part of explaining you why the isolation is important on macOS, why macOS is not Linux. If there is no isolation, this is mostly no security. You can you can elevate your privileges from user to root. You can bypass the whole idea of macOS privacy framework. So no isolation means no security on macOS. Then I showed you some password managers run with a different context. So we had a regular password manager downloaded from the internet, a password manager downloaded from Mac App Store, an Electron password manager, a native password manager written in Qt, and with browser plugin, and we had at the end a password manager that only works in a browser. It's not a plugin, it's not a standalone application with plugin, it's just a plugin that does everything within the browser's context. So different contexts for different password managers. And in the end, recommendations for macOS app developers. So enable hardened runtime, review hardened runtime exceptions, enable sandboxing, notarize your applications. If you use Electron, disable problematic Electron fuses. And of course, at the end, pen test your apps. Verify the code you have written with specialists interested in macOS stuff. And as I told you at the beginning, I'm an author of iOS application security course made both for developers and pen testers. So I prepared a special 10% discount for the BlackAlps community. So there's a code if you'd like to, attend the course. I'll be really happy with it. But for this talk, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Wojciech, for the nice talk, and for the offer to the BlackAlps community. Really nice to you. We are a bit late. I don't want to interrupt you because it was very interesting. And we'll maybe take just one burning question in the room over there. Can someone bring the mic there?
I'll be here for the whole day probably, so if you will not have opportunity to ask questions now, I will be there outside, so you can, of course, catch me.
Hello, thanks for the talk. Did you look at 1Password?
Yeah, I knew that question will come. No, but I have a satisfying answer for you. Another guy did that had a presentation this year on DEF CON, and he showed like 6 ways to get all the entries from 1Password. Nice.
All right. Thanks again. My colleague will bring you a small gift.